The day my uncle handed me a janitor's uniform, everyone in the office laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they believed I deserved it. What none of them knew was that a tiny hidden camera inside his office was about to expose a truth that would change everything. 3 months earlier, I was the youngest project manager in the company my father had built from nothing. My father trusted me. He used to say that one day I would run the business. But the day he died in a sudden accident, everything changed. At the funeral, my uncle stood beside me with tears in his eyes. He hugged me tightly and promised he would take care of everything until I was ready. I believed him. For the next few weeks, he slowly took control of the company. Meetings I used to lead were suddenly held without me. My access to financial reports disappeared. Important emails stopped reaching my inbox. At first, I thought it was temporary. Then one morning he called me into his office. He sat behind my father's old desk like it had always belonged to him. Several senior employees were standing around the room, watching quietly. He slid a paper across the table. "You're not ready for management," he said coldly. "You need to start from the bottom." I stared at the paper. It was a reassignment form. My new position, janitor. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone chuckled. My uncle leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. "If you really care about this company, you'll prove your loyalty." That day I walked out of the office carrying a bucket and a mop while the same people who used to respect me avoided eye contact. For weeks, I cleaned floors while they held meetings about the company my father built. But something felt wrong. Late one evening, while emptying trash in my uncle's office, I noticed something strange. His laptop screen was still on. A message notification popped up. It was from someone named Victor. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The message read, "The board still doesn't know the truth about the accident. As long as the nephew stays quiet, the company is ours." My heart stopped. Accident. My father's death had been ruled an accident. But the way that message was written, it didn't feel like one. I quickly closed the laptop and left the room, but that night I couldn't sleep. Something terrible was hidden behind that office door. The next day, I made a decision. If they wanted me to be a janitor, I would be the most invisible janitor they had ever seen. A week later, while cleaning the office after hours, I carefully placed a tiny hidden camera behind a decorative clock on the wall. It faced directly toward my uncle's desk. Then I waited. For days, nothing happened. Just boring meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. But one night, long after everyone had left, my uncle walked into the office with 2 men I had never seen before. They locked the door behind them. My uncle poured himself a drink and laughed. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Once we finish transferring the final accounts, no one will ever question what happened to my brother." My hand started shaking as I watched the footage from the hidden camera. One of the men replied quietly, "And the kid?" My uncle smirked. "He's busy cleaning toilets. He has no idea what really happened." I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding harder with every second, because the next words that came out of his mouth were something I was never supposed to hear. The brakes were cut exactly the way we planned. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room in the camera footage went silent after he said it, but inside my chest, my heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it might burst. One of the men sitting across from him leaned forward slowly. "You're sure no one suspects anything?" he asked. My uncle laughed, a relaxed, confident laugh that made my stomach twist. "The police already closed the case," he said. "The car went off the road, the fuel tank exploded, and everyone called it a tragic accident." He lifted his glass and took a slow sip. "People see what they expect to see." I felt my hands shaking as I watched the screen. My father's death wasn't an accident. It was murder, and the man responsible was sitting in my father's chair running his company and treating me like dirt. The second man spoke this time. "What about the shares?" he asked. "When everything transfers, the company will officially be yours?" My uncle nodded. "Almost done. A few more signatures, and the company is completely under my control." Then he smirked again. "And by the time that boy realizes what happened, it will be too late." The 3 of them laughed. I sat there staring at the screen, frozen. Every memory of my father came rushing back at once, his long nights at the office. The way he used to say the company wasn't just a business, it was his life's work. And now the man who killed him was stealing everything. My first instinct was to storm into the office and confront him right there. But I stopped myself. If I did that, the footage might disappear. The camera could be destroyed, and they would know I was onto them. No, I needed proof. Real proof. Over the next few weeks, I kept the camera running. Every night after work, I went back to my small apartment and reviewed the footage. At first, it was nothing important. Phone calls, private meetings, conversations about money. But slowly, the pieces started coming together. My uncle wasn't working alone. The two men who visited him that night were part of a larger group that had been quietly draining the company's accounts. Fake contracts, hidden transfers, offshore payments. Millions of dollars were disappearing, and every time something suspicious happened, my uncle made sure my name was attached to the paperwork. I realized what his real plan was. Once the money was gone and the company collapsed, the blame would fall on me, the irresponsible nephew who couldn't handle the business. It was the perfect setup. He would steal everything and destroy my father's legacy while making me look like the criminal. But now I knew the truth, and every day, while they walked past me carrying my mop and bucket, they had no idea I was watching everything. One night the footage captured something even bigger. My uncle was on a video call with someone, a man whose face I had never seen before. The man spoke in a calm, cold voice. "Once the final transfer happens, you understand what comes next." My uncle nodded. "The boy disappears." My entire body went cold. "He knows nothing right now," my uncle continued, "but he's still the legal heir. As long as he exists, the company isn't completely safe." The man on the screen replied quietly, "Then make sure he's no longer a problem." The call ended. I sat there staring at the footage in disbelief. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were planning to get rid of me too. For the first time since this started, fear crept into my chest. But along with the fear, something else grew stronger. Anger. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that burns slowly and refuses to disappear. My uncle thought humiliating me had broken me. He thought turning me into a janitor had made me powerless. But in reality, it had made me invisible. No one notices the janitor. No one stops talking when he walks into the room. And because of that, I had heard everything. Over the next few days, I started preparing. I made copies of every video file. I backed them up in multiple places. A flash drive, cloud storage, an encrypted folder on an old laptop. If anything happened to me, the truth would still exist. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, the company announced a major board meeting. All major shareholders and executives would be present. It was the biggest meeting since my father's death, and my uncle would be leading it. As I pushed my cleaning cart down the hallway that morning, I overheard employees talking excitedly. They believed the company was about to announce a huge expansion. But I knew the truth. This meeting wasn't about expansion, it was about finalizing control. Inside that conference room, my uncle planned to take complete ownership of the company my father built. And once that happened, he would make sure I disappeared. I stopped outside the conference room doors. Through the glass wall, I could see everyone sitting around the long table. Board members, executives, investors, and at the head of the table, my uncle, confident, relaxed, certain that he had already won. In my pocket, the small flash drive felt heavier than anything I had ever carried, because inside it was every conversation, every confession, every piece of evidence that could destroy him. I looked down at my janitor uniform. For months, this uniform had been a symbol of humiliation. But now it felt like armor. The meeting inside the room had just started. My uncle stood up and began speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a smile, "today marks a new chapter for this company." I took a slow breath. Then I reached for the conference room door handle, because in the next few minutes, everything was about to change. The room fell silent the moment the door creaked open. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, and there I stood holding a mop in one hand and a small flash drive in the other. For a second, no one said anything. Then a few people exchanged confused looks. My uncle's face tightened. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "This meeting is for executives only." A few board members frowned, clearly annoyed that a janitor had interrupted such an important meeting. Someone near the back muttered, "Security should handle this." I slowly stepped inside the room and closed the door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like everyone in the room could hear it. But my voice came out calm. "I just need 5 minutes." My uncle laughed. "5 minutes," he said mockingly. "You don't even deserve 5 seconds in this room." Some people chuckled quietly. The humiliation that used to burn inside me now felt strangely distant. Because today I wasn't here as a janitor. I walked toward the long conference table. My uncle's smile faded as I stopped right across from him. "Leave," he said quietly, his voice suddenly colder. "Before you embarrass yourself further." I placed the flash drive on the table. "I think the board should see something first." The room grew quieter. One of the older board members leaned forward slightly. "What is this about?" he asked. My uncle quickly reached for the flash drive, but I placed my hand on it first. "Careful," I said softly. "You might not want to stop this." For the first time since my father died, I saw something I had never seen before on my uncle's face. Fear. He pulled his hand back slowly. "This is ridiculous," he said, trying to laugh it off. "He's upset about being reassigned. This is just a tantrum." But the board member who spoke earlier turned toward the large screen at the front of the room. "Let him speak." The room went still. I walked over to the laptop connected to the screen and inserted the flash drive. My hands were steady now. The first video began playing. At first, it just showed my uncle sitting in his office. The room filled with quiet murmurs. Then the video jumped to the night he met the two men. His voice echoed clearly through the speakers. "Once we finish transferring the final accounts, no one will ever question what happened to my brother. The room froze. Every whisper stopped instantly. I watched the faces around the table as realization slowly spread. Some looked confused. Others looked shocked. My uncle stood up suddenly. "This is edited," he shouted. "This is fake." But the video kept playing. The next line echoed across the room. The breaks were cut exactly the way we planned. One of the board members gasped. Another slammed his hand on the table. "Pause the video," someone demanded. I stopped the footage. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. My uncle's breathing had become uneven. "This is a lie," he said quickly. "He's manipulating the footage. Anyone can edit videos these days." I calmly opened another file. Then maybe this one is fake too. The second video started playing. This time it showed my uncle during the video call with the unknown man. Everyone in the room leaned closer to the screen. The man's voice came through the speakers. "Once the final transfer happens, you understand what comes next." My uncle nodded in the video. The boy disappears. Several people around the table stood up immediately. "What the hell is this?" one of the investors shouted. My uncle looked around the room desperately. "This is taken out of context?" he yelled, but the damage was already done. I could see it in their faces. The trust he had built over months was collapsing in seconds. I turned back toward the table slowly. "For months," I said quietly, "I cleaned the floors of this building while he stole millions from the company my father built." My uncle pointed at me angrily. "He's lying! Check the financial reports!" One of the board members was already opening documents on his laptop. Another executive began typing quickly. Within seconds, the room filled with tense whispers. "Wait, these transfers? Where did this money go? Why are these contracts fake?" My uncle's face turned pale. He had spent months carefully covering his tracks. But the moment people started looking closely, the cracks appeared everywhere. Then the older board member spoke again. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "Is there more?" I looked down at the flash drive. Yes. The final video began. This one showed multiple meetings. Money transfers, secret conversations, every piece of evidence I had collected, every lie, every plan. By the time the video ended, no one in the room was sitting anymore. People were standing, arguing, shouting. Phones were already being pulled out. One board member spoke into his phone urgently. "Call the police." My uncle stumbled backward into his chair. His confident smile had completely disappeared. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You planned this?" he whispered. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "You did?" He tried to speak again, but two security guards had already entered the room. Someone must have called them. They walked straight toward him. The entire room watched as they stood beside his chair. "Sir," one of them said firmly, "we need you to come with us." My uncle looked around the room desperately, but no one defended him. No one spoke for him. The same people who had once respected him were now staring at him like a stranger. As the guards escorted him toward the door, he stopped and looked back at me. His voice was quiet now. "You think this is over?" I didn't answer, because in that moment I realized something. For months, he had believed I was powerless, just a janitor with a mop. But the truth was, the game had changed the moment that hidden camera started recording. And now the entire company knew it. The conference room doors closed behind my uncle as security led him away. For a long moment, no one in the room moved. The air felt heavy, like the entire building was holding its breath. The board members were still staring at the screen where the final video had ended. Some looked shocked, others angry, and a few looked deeply ashamed. One of the investors slowly sat down and rubbed his forehead. "I can't believe this happened right under our noses," he murmured. Another executive turned toward me. "All this time, you were the one gathering the evidence." I nodded quietly. For months, I had imagined this moment. But standing there now, wearing a janitor's uniform in the middle of a board meeting, it felt almost unreal. The older board member who had spoken earlier stood up and walked toward me. He looked at the mop leaning against the wall, then back at me. "You should never have been cleaning floors," he said. Before I could respond, someone else spoke from the far end of the table. "We need to contact the authorities immediately. If even half of those financial transfers are real, this company has been robbed." Phones began ringing around the room as people started calling lawyers and auditors. Within minutes, the entire building seemed to know something huge had happened. Employees gathered in the hallways, whispering and trying to figure out why police cars were suddenly arriving outside. I stood quietly near the window as flashing lights reflected across the glass. My mind kept replaying one memory. My father standing in this same building years ago, smiling proudly as he showed me the office for the first time. "This company isn't just about money," he had told me. "It's about trust." For months, I thought that trust had died with him. But maybe it hadn't. The conference room door opened again. Two police officers stepped inside. They spoke with the board members while reviewing the video evidence from the flash drive. One of them eventually walked over to me. "You're the one who recorded these videos." "Yes," I said. He studied me carefully. "You realize this is extremely serious evidence." "I know," he nodded. "We'll need copies of everything." I handed him another flash drive. I made backups. For the first time, the officer allowed a small smile. "Smart." As the officers left the room to continue their investigation, the board members began discussing the future of the company. The conversations were tense. Millions of dollars had been stolen. The reputation of the business was now at risk. But one thing was clear to everyone in the room. My uncle's control over the company was finished. After nearly an hour of discussion, the older board member stood up again. The room quieted. He turned toward me. "Your father trusted you to lead this company one day." I didn't say anything. He continued. "Your uncle manipulated the board during a time when we were grieving and confused. He convinced us you were inexperienced." Several people around the table looked uncomfortable. "But today," the man said firmly, "you proved something none of us expected." He paused for a moment. "You proved that you were the only one who cared enough to protect this company." The room was silent again. Then he said something that completely caught me off guard. "I would like to propose that you take temporary leadership of the company while we repair the damage." A few people exchanged surprised looks, but slowly heads began nodding, one by one, until every board member in the room agreed. Just hours earlier, I had been pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. Now they were asking me to lead the company. The same company my father had built with his own hands. I took a slow breath. "I'll do it," I said, "but not for revenge." The room listened carefully. "I'll do it to fix what was broken." Later that evening, the building finally began to quiet down. Police had taken my uncle into custody. Auditors were already investigating the missing money, and employees were slowly returning to their desks, trying to process everything that had happened. I walked alone through the hallway where I had spent months cleaning floors. The janitor cart was still sitting against the wall. For a moment, I stared at the uniform I was still wearing. It reminded me of every insult, every laugh, every moment people looked down on me. But strangely, I didn't hate it anymore, because that uniform had given me something powerful. It made me invisible. And being invisible allowed me to uncover the truth. I placed the mop back on the cart and pushed it toward the storage room one last time. As I turned the corner, I noticed something unexpected. Several employees were standing there. They quickly stepped aside as I approached. No one laughed. No one whispered. Instead, one of them spoke quietly. "We're sorry." Another nodded. We didn't know what was happening. I simply gave a small nod in return, because holding on to anger wouldn't bring my father back. But protecting what he built, that was something I could still do. The next morning, I walked into the building again. But this time, everything felt different. People greeted me with respect. Doors opened before I even reached them. When I entered my father's old office, sunlight was pouring through the large windows. The desk was exactly the same as I remembered it. I slowly walked over and sat down. For a moment, I just looked around the room. The same walls, the same view. But the man who used to sit here was gone. I opened the drawer where my father used to keep his notebook. Inside was a small photograph. It showed the two of us standing in front of the company building years ago. He had his arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I placed it carefully on the desk. The revenge I once dreamed about wasn't what I felt anymore. Seeing my uncle arrested didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, something else filled that space. Justice. And the quiet realization that the truth had finally won. Outside the office window, employees were walking into the building, starting another workday. Life was moving forward. The company would recover. My father's legacy would survive, and the people who tried to destroy it would face the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's proving they never deserved the power they once had, and making sure they never get it back.